Two guys, same age, same job, same paycheck. One of them bought a house. The other bought stocks. 20 years later, one of them is sitting on over $500,000. The other one is also sitting on over $500,000. But here's the thing. One of them worked for it every single day. The other one basically did nothing. And the one who did nothing, he actually came out ahead. This is the real estate versus stocks debate. And I'm not going to give you someone's opinion. I'm going to give you the math, the psychology, and the hidden truth that the loudest voices on both sides conveniently forget to mention. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which one is right for you and why most people pick the wrong one for the wrong reasons. Let's go. Here's the uncomfortable truth about this debate. Most people don't choose between real estate and stocks based on math. They choose based on feeling, and then they spend the rest of their lives finding reasons to justify that feeling. Real estate people say things like, stocks are basically gambling. At least with a house, you own something real. Stock people say things like, tenants? Repairs? No thanks. My index fund doesn't call me at 2 a.m. Both sides are right about something. Both sides are missing something. But there's a deeper psychological reason why this argument never gets resolved. And it comes down to one word: tangibility. When you own a house, you can drive past it. You can touch the walls. You can stand in the kitchen and feel like a real investor. Your brain lights up. It feels like wealth. When you own stocks, you open an app and see a number. Sometimes the number goes up. Sometimes it goes down. And your brain, which evolved to fear invisible threats, treats that volatility like a tiger in the bushes. Same dollars, completely different feelings. That psychological gap is exactly why so many people get this decision wrong. And it's exactly why we're going to follow two real people making this choice in real time, so you can see what the feelings look like and what the math says. Meet Jordan and Danny. Both are 28, both work in marketing, earning $65,000 a year. Both have been disciplined savers and have $50,000 sitting in the bank. Both want to be financially free before they turn 50. Both read the same articles, watched the same videos, and came to completely different conclusions. Jordan is buying a rental property. Danny is investing in index funds. Same money, same goal, different path. Let's watch. Year one, this is easier than I thought. Jordan finds a 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood for $250,000. He puts his $50,000 down, that's a 20% down payment, and gets a 30-year mortgage at 7% interest. His monthly payment comes out to $1,330. He finds a tenant almost immediately and starts charging $1,800 a month in rent. Do the math. $1,800 minus $1,330 equals $470 in monthly cash flow. Times 12 months, that's $5,640 a year. Jordan feels like a genius. He's bragging at every family dinner. His uncle slaps him on the back and says, "That's how you build real wealth, son." But that's not the whole story. In month 4, the water heater dies, $1,100. In month 7, the tenant reports a crack in the foundation, $2,800 to fix. Property taxes, $3,200 for the year. Landlord insurance, $1,100. Lawn maintenance, $600. Jordan's $5,640 in cash flow just became approximately $700 in actual profit after expenses. He doesn't tell his uncle that part. Meanwhile, Danny does something almost embarrassingly simple. She puts her $50,000 into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. She sets up an automatic transfer of $500 a month from her paycheck. She goes about her life. By the end of year 1, with an average market return of roughly 10%, her $50,000 has grown to about $55,700. Her monthly contributions added another $6,200. Total portfolio, approximately $61,900. She didn't fix anything. She didn't talk to any tenants. She watched exactly 0 YouTube videos about foundation repair. Year 1 numbers: Jordan's net gain, roughly $700. Danny's net gain, roughly $11,900. But Jordan isn't worried. It's a long game, he says. And honestly, he's right, just not in the way he thinks. Okay, this is harder than I thought. Jordan now has a problem. His first tenant moved out at the end of year 2. He had the property vacant for 2 months while he found someone new. 2 months of 0 rent, but the mortgage kept coming. That alone cost him $2,660. His new tenant is fine until she isn't. A broken HVAC unit in August, $3,400. But here's what's also true. The property has appreciated. A 4% annual appreciation rate puts it at around $281,000 now. His mortgage balance has dropped to about $235,000 through regular payments. His equity What he actually owns is about $46,000. Not bad, not amazing, but real. Psychologically, though, Jordan is starting to feel something he didn't expect. Resentment. A tenant texts him on a Tuesday night about a broken garbage disposal. He fixes it, he smiles, but inside, something is shifting. This is what personal finance YouTube doesn't show you. The spreadsheet says one thing. The 9 p.m. repair calls say another. Danny, at year 3, her portfolio is sitting at approximately $93,000. She spent 0 evenings researching local plumbers. She did, however, have to survive a market dip in year 2. The index fund dropped 14% over a few months. For a few weeks, she checked her app every day, her stomach in knots. This is where a lot of people make the most expensive mistake of their financial lives. They see a red number and they sell. They lock in the loss and walk away forever. Danny didn't sell. She kept her automatic transfer running. She bought more shares at the lower price without even realizing it. And this is where something called forced patience quietly becomes Danny's superpower.
Year 5, the scoreboard gets interesting. Jordan's property is now worth approximately $304,000. Mortgage balance? Around $223,000. Equity? $81,000. He's also gotten smarter. He raised the rent twice. His cash flow is better. He's figured out which local contractors are reliable and which ones will rob him blind. The learning curve was steep, but he climbed it. And now he started thinking about buying a second property. His friends from the real estate investing Facebook group are all doing it. The podcast he listens to every morning says it's the only path to real freedom. The group chat is full of success stories. This is social proof doing what social proof does, making you feel like the obvious move is also the safe move. If everyone's doing it, can't be wrong, right? Danny's portfolio at year 5, approximately $145,000. Without a second thought, without a Facebook group, without a single repair invoice. The gap is widening, but Jordan is leveraged. And leverage, when it works, is like a cheat code for wealth building. The question is what happens when it doesn't? Year 10, and then something unexpected happened. This is the checkpoint where most real estate versus stocks comparisons end, because it's where real estate usually starts to look great on paper. Jordan's property has appreciated to about $365,000. His mortgage balance is now around $205,000. His equity, $160,000. His rent is now $2,200 a month. He's raised it 3 times. And his cash flow, even after all expenses, is running around $400 a month net. He's also made a mistake, a big one. In year 8, flush with confidence and caught up in a wave of investor enthusiasm, he bought a second property. He stretched his budget, got a higher rate loan, and bought in a neighborhood that looked promising. 6 months later, a major employer in that area announced it was relocating. Property values plateaued. His second tenant stopped paying rent for 3 months during an economic slowdown. The eviction process took 4 months and cost him $6,200 in legal fees and lost income. He still has both properties. He's still building equity, but the second investment, it aged him. This is the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. Danny, at year 10, has approximately $285,000 in her portfolio. She also lived through a significant market crash in year 9. Her portfolio dropped nearly 28% in 8 months. For a while, it looked like this. Danny, $220,000. Jordan, $160,000 equity. Jordan, watching the news one morning, texted Danny, "Still happy with your stocks?" She didn't sell. She didn't even slow down her contributions. A year later, the market had recovered and then some. Year 20, the number nobody expected. Here we are. The finish line. Jordan's original property is now worth approximately $547,000. Mortgage almost paid off. Balance around $155,000. Equity on property 1, $392,000. His second property, after a slower appreciation in that trickier neighborhood, adds another $140,000 in equity. Combined real estate net worth minus outstanding mortgage balances, roughly $500,000 over 20 years, factoring in all rental income collected, all expenses paid, all repairs, vacancies, legal fees, property management costs in later years, and mortgage interest. His total return on the original $50,000 is significant. Real estate delivered. Danny's portfolio at year 20, with consistent contributions and the power of compounding, approximately $530,000. Let that land for a second. Danny, who never fixed a single thing, never dealt with a single tenant, never lost a single night of sleep over a late rent payment, ended up in essentially the same place. And here's the part that changes everything.
Let's talk about what was really happening beneath the surface this whole time. Jordan kept going because real estate felt like wealth. Every month, rent came in. Every year, the property value crept up. He could drive past his investment. That tangible, physical connection kept him emotionally committed, even when the numbers weren't great. That's tangibility bias at work. And in this case, it helped him. It kept him in the game, but it also nearly broke him when he overextended. The FOMO, the social proof from his investor community, the confidence that came from early success, those pushed him into that second property before he was truly ready. Not because the math said to, because everyone around him was doing it, and he didn't want to be left behind. Danny's biggest enemy was invisible. She couldn't see her wealth growing day to day. She had to trust a process she couldn't touch. And twice, once during a 14% correction and once during a 28% crash, her brain told her to run. The only reason she didn't is because she'd automated everything. Her $500 a month transferred on the first of every month, rain or shine. She outsmarted her own fear by removing the decision entirely. That's not a finance strategy. That's a psychology strategy, and it's the one that doesn't make the highlight reel.
Here's the truth that both sides of this debate don't want to admit. The 20-year numbers for Jordan and Danny are almost identical. They arrived at roughly the same destination, but the journey was completely different. Jordan spent an estimated 300 plus hours managing properties over 20 years. He dealt with legal disputes, difficult tenants, emergency repairs, and 2 sleepless weeks during a financial crisis when he was carrying 2 mortgages and 1 empty unit. He also built real skills. He understands property management, leverage, negotiation, and market dynamics in a way Danny simply doesn't. Danny spent maybe 10 hours on her investments over 20 years, mostly reading, a few portfolio rebalances, and 2 very difficult weeks when the market crashed and she had to physically stop herself from opening the app. Same result? Radically different experience. So which one won? It depends on what you're measuring. If you measure dollars, Ty. If you measure hours, Danny won. If you measure skills and control, Jordan won. If you measure stress, Danny won. Barely. If you measure the feeling of building something, Jordan won. And it wasn't close. And this is what most people miss. The best investment is not the one with the highest theoretical return. It's the one that matches who you actually are, and one you'll stay committed to for 20 years without destroying yourself or your returns along the way.
So, what do you do with this? If you like systems, dislike confrontation, want liquidity, meaning you want to be able to access your money without a 6-month selling process, and you're honest enough with yourself to know you'll panic during a crash, then stocks and index funds are probably your path. Automate everything. Never look at it during a crash. Let compounding do the heavy lifting. If you're handy or willing to learn, you live in a market with strong appreciation. You can handle illiquidity, and you actually enjoy the process of building and managing something physical. Then real estate can be extraordinary. But go in with eyes open. Factor in every cost. Don't let your investor community's highlight reel become your business plan. And if you can do both, the most financially resilient people often do. Liquid wealth in the market, leveraged wealth in property, each one hedging the weaknesses of the other. And this matters more than any of the numbers. Start now. Because the biggest variable in both calculations wasn't appreciation rates or rental yields or expense ratios, it was time. The 20-year gap between starting at 28 and starting at 38 is not 10 years. It's potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Jordan and Danny are both fine. Both built real wealth. Both have options that people who started later or never started at all simply don't have. But here's what 20 years of watching both paths taught us. The enemy of wealth isn't a bad investment. It's a good investment you abandon at the wrong moment. It's the house you sell in a panic when the market softens. It's the portfolio you cash out the month before the recovery. It's the second property you buy because everyone else is buying, not because your numbers said to. Every financial decision carries 2 price tags, the one on the sticker and the psychological cost of living with that decision for 20 years. The investors who win aren't always the ones who found the best asset. They're the ones who found an asset they could hold on to when their own brain was screaming at them to let go. Real estate didn't beat stocks. Stocks didn't beat real estate. Patience
beat everything else. And the investors who understood that, they're not arguing about which asset is better. They're already wealthy.